Welcome to Day to Day Democracy, a podcast about local government in British Columbia, what it does, what it struggles with, and the people working every day to make it function. Local government is where expectations are high, authority is limited, resources are tight, and the public pressure is relentless. I'm Brian Frankelver from Vanderhoof, and joining me today is
I'm Arjun Singh. I'm in Kamloops, former city councillor here. Spent time on the EBCM board with these fine gentlemen. And we are joined today by our guest.
Pete Fry, City Councillor in Vancouver. Since first being elected in 2018, Pete has been deeply involved in conversations around housing affordability, climate action, and how his city balances the growth with the needs of the existing community. He's also known for taking a thoughtful, independent approach to decision making, often navigating the tension between big picture policy and the day to day realities facing residents. We'll talk with Pete today about what it's really like to govern in one of Canada's largest, fastest growing cities, the challenges of local decision making under pressure, and where he sees the future of urban governance heading. Welcome, Pete.
Gentlemen, it's so nice to see you in the virtual sense. I do miss actually hanging out with you guys at UBCM though. That was
Was
you know,
always fun,
Yes,
Pete.
yes.
yeah.
When you
Big
No,
news
can.
with Gary. Big news with Gary.
Yeah, big news
Yes.
with
Oh,
Gary and
okay.
That's
So you
it's
do know
public.
that is public.
Yeah,
Okay.
Yeah,
yeah,
that's public.
for
Yeah.
sure.
Yeah. Yeah. So,
Yeah.
the executive director of the last, 20 something years is he tasted the good life in retirement. He's like, you know what? Actually, it's pretty good on the other side. He did some traveling and I think he's ready to move on. So,
Yeah, I'm excited
And
for him, for
yeah, me
sure.
too. He's a hardworking guy and he's put in the time.
I'm
And
not excited at all. This is a disaster. What's
well, I
going
mean,
on
change is difficult, right? Like, who
here?
knows?
No, I'm reflecting on um, the most important thing I did as a city councillor ever in 14 years was hire the city manager. I mean, you can take anything else out of that tenure, and the most important thing I think I did was hire the city manager, help hire the city manager. So the executive of UBCM now has a big job.
Yeah,
Especially now more than ever, right? Because it's
more than ever. And
such a
that's what,
complicated time for local government.
yeah, and that's what we're hearing across the province, and that even coming up in October for local government elections, this will be the biggest, one of the biggest local government elections in our history. So,
Yeah.
we'd like to talk about that today.
Let's
Arjun.
talk a bit about you, Pete. So essentially, you are now 7.5 years, I think, into this position as a city councillor in Vancouver. Can you talk a bit about how you what you were doing before and how you kind of came into the role? What was your kind of like sort of origin story in the local government world?
Well, it came about it the honest way, through grassroots politics. Now, some of your listeners may or may not know this, but my mom is the longest serving female MP in Canadian history.
Wow.
Although I didn't grow up around politics. I was probably about 25, 26 when she got elected, so I was long out of the house,
Yeah.
living my own life. Kind of an underground life, actually. I was, sort of in the punk rock scene, and I was a graphic designer by trade. So I really kind of worked in the arts and rock and roll and the rave scene and lots of interesting things. And then gradually moved into more corporate work as I got older, and then realized I hated it, and it wasn't really meaningful to me. And I started, I've lived in and around the downtown east side, which is the poorest neighborhood in Vancouver, probably, one of the poorest postal codes in Canada. And I've lived there for 30 something years, and I really started to realize that there's a lot of work in community development that is way more meaningful and that I was good at. And after a friend of mine was hit by a car, I realized that there was a lot of urban design issues and traffic management, and the neighborhood was sort of forgotten. And then I started working and doing a lot of work with families in the downtown east side. We don't often think about the families that are struggling down there. Lots of
Yeah.
new immigrant families, lots of indigenous families from across British Columbia that are really struggling, and struggling to keep their families together because they're coming out of addictions or poverty or all these different issues. And you know well-intentioned MCFD, Ministry of Children and Family Development, come in and take the kids into foster care, which often doesn't work out well for the kids, doesn't work out well for the parents, and everybody kind of comes out of it broken. so I really got into this really grassroots, like how can I make a difference in communities? And I found it so much more rewarding. And then just one thing led to another. And before I knew it, I was really representing community in a way that I hadn't anticipated. And and people really appreciated me doing that work. So I ran for council and lost. Actually, my original council, I was like a backward baseball hat, soul patch, like, yo, what's up kind of guy. And I did surprisingly well for like such a goofy persona that was very much not a professional look. But and then I kind of got thrown into a couple of by-elections. Anyway, by that point, by the time I got elected, I'd run 3 times and lost 3 times, for which Bill Thielman, noted political pundit, described me as Pete Fry, the likable but perennial loser. And I wore that like a badge of honor. And so I told everybody that on the campaign
Bill
trail.
Tillman, God damn it.
Yeah, 2018, I rocked it. I just came in with this like the second highest vote count.
Yeah.
Very like so because I think, the perseverance, that like get knocked down, get back up
Yeah.
again. People realize, he's not that horrible. He seems like he knows what he's talking about. He's actually, somewhat pragmatic and thoughtful. So yeah, there's the lesson right there is perseverance, get knocked down, get back up again, keep
Do you
keep
do you think do you think, Pete, that the community needed to get to know you a little bit better, and then a second highest vote count in 2018 tells me that they maybe needed somebody that had a balanced view. Is that what you saw, or did everything just come together for you there?
I mean, 2018 saw the end of a 10-year dynasty of Vision Vancouver, which was Gregor
Yeah.
Robertson's party, and they had like come in a wave, and they had dominated the civic electoral scene at not just city council, but also at park board and school board for the
Hmm.
better part of 10 years. And so we have an elected park board in Vancouver, very unique among Canadian cities. I think Cultus Lake has a park board, but actually not a bad concept at all. And a lot of American cities still have park boards that are elected and administer parks. Nevertheless, Vision had dominated that, and they had come to the natural end of their 10-year sort of reign. And so I was benefited from this pendulum swing that saw a big change. And I think that I had been seen as pragmatic, I'd seen as rooted in community, and doing the work, and not being too radical to scare people off.
Can I ask a question? So, Pete, you're a Green Party person. Obviously, you've been on. I got my background here is you at the EBCM convention for chairing a resolution session. I'm sorry, I keep on covering your face here. I hope you don't mind. But you served on two very different councils. I mean, the council you served on initially was no majority. The mayor was unaffiliated. You had all these people kind of, and you were obviously a bunch of times on Zoom with COVID. And then you get on this council with ABC majority, and that obviously has been chipped away with in various ways over the course of the term. And there's been issues there for them for sure. But what has been like? How is that kind of like? What's the comparison? Like, what do you think is one was better than the other? Like, what is your kind of feeling
Oh
about all
yeah,
that stuff?
absolute extremes. Great question, Merchant. I mean,
Hmm.
we really, I mean, and you guys were all there too, right? I mean, that 2022 local government election in BC was a sea change. It was like a lot of good people got unelected.
Tell me about
Uh,
it.
yeah, exactly, right? Because but we went through, this collective like crisis with COVID and mask mandates and economic downturn and chaos on the streets, so the scenario was ripe. So I mean, when I got elected in 2018, we had a very mixed council. There was like 6 progressives. So we have 10 on council plus the mayor. We had 5 progressive councilors, 5 sort of right of center councilors, and a sort of progressive NDP MP, formerly now mayor. So we had just enough to kind of tilt things in our general favor, but a plurality of parties that forced us to work across the line. And oftentimes I would be working with folks from the right of center party to get certain
Hmm.
things done. And it was actually a very exciting time. It was super collaborative. I liked the consensus building. I liked the fact that no one political entity or partisan group was dominating, because so for your listeners, Vancouver has a political party system. I'm sure we can get into that specifically and
Yeah.
why and how, but I'm of the opinion that partisan politics don't really have a useful place in local government.
Amen.
It's super
Yeah.
messy, but here we are. That's the situation in Vancouver. But that council in 2018 to 2022 was unique in that there wasn't some kind of partisan domination. And we did have to collaborate and work together. But then COVID happened, and then everything broke, right? So we went from, if you wanted to come speak to council on whatever item, you would have to, take the afternoon off work and show up at City Hall and wait in the gallery and like wait for your turn to speak, and take a few hours out of your day. And then COVID happened, and we suddenly went into virtual meetings. And suddenly you could be at the beach, you could be at the bar, you could be at work, you could be wherever, and you could just phone it in. And it
Mhm.
suddenly we went from like 10 speakers on an item to 110 speakers on an item to like we had, I mean, one item we had over 500 speakers. And
Jeez.
if you can imagine, like at 5 minutes a speaker plus questions potentially, like it outrageous amount of time, and plus everybody was already ramped up because people were collectively having this crisis with COVID. And so our meetings became excruciatingly long, seemingly totally dysfunctional. And it really went off the rails. And then meanwhile, our current mayor, Ken Sim, who had also run for mayor in 2018 and lost by
Mhm.
500 votes, he spent the 4 years of 2018 to 2022 plotting his revenge, building a massive war chest
Mhm.
and getting all the networks in place. So when the 2022 election came in, he was poised to sweep. Kennedy Stewart, the then mayor, in a panic, realized he was going to get creamed, and the only way out was under the Local Election Campaign Finance Act. You need to have more people on your team because every teammate in Vancouver is worth like $200,000 in fundraising. So if he
Oh,
was going to compete with a $2 million campaign from Ken Sim, he needed to run a council. So he foolishly threw the entire council under the bus and said, "Oh, a plural council is dysfunctional. It can't work, blah, 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 blah. I need to
Mhm.
run a team of my people." And he lost disastrously. And actually, we saw ABC sweep in because we, went
Yeah.
back to this really partisan system.
So how do you see that today? Jump ahead to the ABC party, and you're a large council representing a large community, and and trying to be that independent voice, if you want to call it, even though you're representing another party, but being that independent voice. How does governance look today? Because it seems like it can be manipulated.
I
How do you
believe the
see
I
that
believe the
now?
exact quote was a disturbing repudiation of the rule of law in describing the mayor and
Yeah,
council majority here in Vancouver. Yeah, because
yeah.
the reality is that and again, we elected a mayor who was going to run the city like a business. He had zero experience in local government, zero experience in governance. And so came in with like this kind of businessman ethos, and it was just going to be his way or the highway. And very quickly it became apparent that it was quite like a very tightly controlled narrative of everything from within the mayor's office. And
Hmm.
like his counselors were told how to think, his park board commissioners were told how to think, and things quickly unraveled actually for that party, in no small part because when folks didn't go with the mayor's wishes, he became quite punitive and tried to get rid of the park board, for instance, and threw Rebecca Bly out of the party and
Yeah,
alienated his school trustees. And so like quickly that authoritarian strong mayor idea that he had didn't really pan out because, as you know, we have a weak mayor system in Canada, and it wasn't
mhm,
really set up for him to be like the guy that he thought this job would award him with all this power.
yeah. I
But
think
it
if
has
I
been, I
could,
would say, from a personal perspective, as somebody who believes in local government, believes in like just doing the right thing and independent thought, it's been super
yeah,
disappointing because it's
it,
been very isolating. I've been shut out of pretty much everything just out of petty vindictiveness,
yeah.
where I know I'm capable. I'm one of the more capable people on council, um, and experienced, and it's kind of disrespectful, but also foolish because what they've ended up doing is giving me nothing but like an opportunity to, well, I mean, if you're going to put me in a corner, all I can do is come out swinging. And, you've given me a ton more time on my hands to like go after all your shenanigans, which I'm
mhm.
happy to do.
We see, there's lots of communities in British local governments in British Columbia, 189, 190, whatever it is. And so whatever people portray or gets portrayed on the media, say the news media, and what's happening down there, sort of gets out to the rest of British Columbia going, well, if that's how they act and that's how they do it, provincially, people see that and go, is Is that what is happening in the rest of British Columbia? Is that how we can manipulate mayors, regional districts, local government boards across British Columbia? So we see that, and it transcends and goes forward into all of the communities in local government. So we're kind of at this precipice of everybody looking at that going, that's the norm. And we think that that's dangerous. You have sat or sitting on the board of UBCM, and Rebecca was with FCM. So you get to see provincially, and you get to see, and she gets to see the federal side. Do you think that, that the mayor in this case and the ABC party uh, realize some of the, I call it damage that they're doing to the rest of BC, or are they just staying focused right into their lane in Vancouver?
Well, I mean, first of all, let me apologize for setting that tone because that is horrible, and I feel bad. And I would say also, arguably, like the tone also comes from the United States, right? We see like
Yes.
this Trumpian kind of
Oh, yeah.
style is
Well, provincial government,
infecting.
federal government, like it
Yeah,
comes from lots of places for sure.
yeah, it's infectious and it's gross. But
Yeah.
um yeah, I don't think that they see it from that perspective. They're not very collaborative. This is a mayor who refuses to sit on the regional district board, just out of I don't even know why, because
Mm,
he doesn't believe in that kind of thing. So I don't know that they have a sense of beyond Vancouver in that responsibility sense. Ironically, I reflect on my UBCM experience and my whole run for mayor actually, and I talk often about like my experience on UBCM, and I've been privileged to meet mayors and councillors from across British Columbia, and most of them don't have political party systems,
no.
and most of them function just fine. And in fact, the mayor is like the cheerleader in chief, where you're working with your council, you're lifting up your councillors, and you're giving them things to do, and it's not this adversarial thing. It's more like, hey, we're all working for the betterment of Kamloops or betterment of Vanderhoof or betterment of like
Yeah.
our community, and that's what we're in it for. We're all on the same team. We're working for the same thing. We're not in some kind of petty partisan war, which I mean, I will say as Greens, like, I mean, I'm Green Party,
Yeah.
but Greens are sort of united. Like, we're not super partisan, like, like Green Party of Canada, Green Party of British Columbia. We're all like cousins. We have the same last name. We love each other. I have no idea what they're up to. I see them once a year.
Yeah.
But what unites Greens is like the value system. So it's really not, we're more idealist than
Yeah.
ideological. So I can vote very differently from other Greens and still be a Green and still share those values. It doesn't mean we have to vote in lockstep. So we take partisan a little bit differently. But
Wait, let me talk a bit about that, Pete. Um, so Pete Fry potentially is mayor of Vancouver. Let's talk about this for a second. Let's talk a bit about a couple of things. So essentially, um, what I've seen, let me be just very, very blunt about this. What I've seen is when people become, sometimes when people become mayor, you have your chief of staff, you have your like your group around you, you have your infrastructure around you in the office. In the place of Vancouver, you have infrastructure. It's funny enough, my sister ran against Elizabeth May a couple of times in Sans Gulf Islands. She was the NDP candidate, my sister, and Elizabeth May was obviously famous as the Green Party MP. And you talk about partisan fights. I mean, NDP and Greens in Southern Vancouver Island, like that's partisan stuff, right? They go at each other pretty good. So I don't think any party is necessarily immune from kind of power politics in some ways. Um, how do you see? And you talked about the influence of parties. So how do you see yourself as mayor in terms of how you would work with council, how would you would work with the community, like how you would try to avoid some of the pitfalls around the polarization and partisanship, which sometimes almost naturally is an influence of those kind of roles.
yeah, I mean, it's not really how I roll, though. Honestly,
Yeah.
like, I mean, I'm very much interested in what the plurality brings. I mean, and again, I go back to my UBCM experience, right? Like come in as like the Vancouver guy. It's like, what does the Vancouver guy know about like the rest of the province and local government issues in the rest of the province? And I've found it such a privilege to learn and to make space for others. So like when I mean, you guys know on resolutions and stuff, I bend over backwards to accommodate other communities and remote and rural communities and smaller communities, because I recognize I have a privilege as, living in the big smoke. I don't know what's going on. And I value that opportunity to lend voices to everybody else, because that's what we're all here for, right? We're all on UBCM. When most of us are elected to UBCM to represent communities and collectively the voice of local government in British Columbia. And I mean, I think I see that's how council should really operate too, because we're all, ideally we have a plurality of people who are elected representing different constituencies. I like, my two newest colleagues, Sean Orr and Lucy Maloney, they have very specialized constituencies. Sean's like a leader in sort of poverty reduction kind of work
Mhm.
and that kind of stuff. And I see a place where I let him lead on that, and like, hey man, let's build on your strengths. And like Lucy is like a leader in active transportation and cycling and stuff. It's like, all right, Lucy, you've got you know this stuff. Let's help you lead with that, and let's help you, you know, do the best for our city, because that's what you're good at and that's what you're good at. And I'm
Yeah,
just here to like help facilitate that to some degree.
awesome. And as a big city, Pete, you're probably not you're I'm going to say you're probably a target with the provincial government, and I know you guys have your Vancouver charter and the rest of us have a different charter, but
I know we're super special that way.
yeah, you are. but
We,
but
we, we say the same thing.
the BC government has, and it signals that it still will continue to, that it will override municipal authority. And so, people that listen to this, we're trying to prep people that are interested in running for local government, giving them some more information. So maybe give us a thought about what you see, what you've seen in that provincial municipal role, that where maybe province overrides its authority, or and maybe talk to that a little bit.
Yeah, no, I think it's an incredibly difficult situation it's put on local governments. Of course, as we like to say, local governments are a creature of the province. We don't exist under the federal constitution. We are literally created by provincial legislation. So they make the rules that allow us to exist and to
Hmm.
make land use decisions and collect taxes and write bylaws and all this. We are dependent on the province. I think that in recent years they've overplayed their hand and really imposed a lot of like, and for instance, the housing target stuff that they've imposed on the city of Vancouver has put us in a very difficult position, because the reality is that um, we're getting these, arbitrary numbers for targets that are now completely disconnected from changes to federal immigration and foreign students and that kind of thing. So we have more of a glut of housing. We haven't even built all the housing that's been approved under the targets, because the economy, they're not penciling out. And so
Hmm.
increasingly developers are saying, well, look, if you want us to, build this housing to meet your targets, what are you going to do? How are you going to sweeten the pot? And for us, that means like, changing, like reducing the amount of developer contribution expectations from developers, things that pay for things like, the money that pays for community centers and parks and roads and sidewalks and daycares and all the things that we need commensurate to growth. And of course, infrastructure, pipes and sewers and all the stuff under the
Hmm.
ground. So, it's putting a lot of pressure on local governments. And then, of course, we see all this sort of downloading of like, traditionally um, provincial responsibilities. And, I would say there's been very manifest in the whole decriminalization conversation, which I was a big part of as chair and vice chair variously at the UBCM's Health and Social Development Committee. And I can tell you, we were very, very clear and specific. The leadership of the Health and Social Development Committee, uh, Councillor Corey Ramsay from Prince George, and of course, Mayor Sarah Story from Fraser Lake. And we were very active in that conversation and wanting to be a part of it, telling the provinces like, look, you're making some big moves on decriminalization. You need to get the flavor on the ground from local governments, because we can help you. We can help navigate this. And frankly, they didn't welcome our input. They didn't welcome our our local ground, on the ground understanding. And as a result, it was a disaster, because they rolled out decriminalization. They didn't think about like consumption sites and public consumption and overdose prevention sites, and
Hmm.
like who's doing the bylaw enforcement. And we don't have the resources in small communities. Like the whole thing was could have been handled so much differently. And at the end of the day, it became kind of a political boondoggle. And we see the same kind of thing playing out with a lot of these housing targets that increasingly, now with, the irony, of course, is that we have this, these housing targets, which include in Vancouver a pretty significant amount of below market and social housing on the one hand. On the other hand, the province has just abandoned the community housing fund, which is they're like, oh, we're broke now, so we don't have any money to put
Mhm.
into below market housing, which is like, we don't have the money to do it. We traditionally rely on senior governments to backstop that kind of stuff. So it's really put us in a very difficult position. And
Um,
and I think it's going to probably shake out in how this provincial election plays out, because I think a lot of folks are pretty frustrated, and
Yeah,
yeah,
increasingly local governments across British Columbia.
yeah, I think you'll see that.
it's it would be remiss of me not to ask you about climate change, given that you're a Green Party councillor, Pete, and we work with Brian and I had a great opportunity to work with Adrian Carr on the EBCM Climate Action Committee several years ago, and we helped rewrite local government climate policy in the province at that time. And as someone who's spent a lot of time working on that stuff myself, I have a concern that, actually, it's funny because one of the ways I kind of really got a lot of the inspiration was from actually the work of the Vision Council, Andrew Reimer, those folks talking about this green city stuff in Vancouver back like 10, 12 years ago. It gave a lot of us across the province a bit more of a permission structure and also a bit of a framework to work with to kind of modify for our own communities and for the province as a whole. And what I'm noticing now is climate change just seems to have taken a back seat on a lot of the issue, a lot of the we prioritize concerns just like economy, housing, public safety, and then somewhere down in the bottom is climate change. And I note some of the commentary around the NDP new leader Avi Lewis is that he's flogging a dead horse with the climate change stuff he's talking about. But I'm really obviously we're still very concerned. We have fires, wildfires, floods, extreme weather. So what is your thoughts about that, and how can we kind of help bring that sort of back into a conversation, keeping in mind also the economics of climate change mid to long term probably are very much in the favor of kind of doing that work, but short term maybe there's some concerns.
Yeah, and I mean, the elephant in the room, of course, is like the Trump tariffs, and what does that mean for the Canadian economy and our future as a nation? Like, we need to have that sort of, like the export prowess. So, like, unfortunately, like resource extraction is a big part of climate change, and resource extraction is also a big part of our economy, and so we are in a bit of a tight position, and it's been a failure of generations of policy to not expand our economic strength beyond just resource extraction and, like, what is it, hewers of woods and carriers of water, or whatever
Yep.
that old expression was. Like, I mean, so I think that we've lapsed on that, and now we're in a crisis position where we are struggling as a nation to figure it out. And I think the challenge with climate change is this sort of, it's the cause and effect. Like, we all experience the effects of climate change. It's real. Like, there's no longer any denial in British Columbia or anywhere in Canada about, like, yeah, climate change is actually happening. I mean, you guys see it in your communities. We're doing our capital planning stuff, and it's like, oh yeah, all this stuff is falling apart because of climate change, sea level rise. We're a coastal city. We're
Mhm.
like, oh,
Mhm.
we got to build all this extra stuff because we're getting these storm surges that are wiping out seawalls and wiping out swimming pools and all this, like, and it's only going to get worse because those are the effects of climate change. We haven't managed to kind of, so there's appetite, I think, for building in the resilience and mitigating the effects of climate change. Mitigating the cause of climate change is a bit of a trickier one because people don't see, like, it's, I mean, the old chestnut, it's like, well, look, we could, like, I mean, I hear this all the time. It's like, we could end all, carbon pollution in the city of Vancouver, get rid of all fossil fuels, blah, 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 blah. We could do that, and, like, everybody's on bicycles or whatever, and it's in electric cars, but it still wouldn't change climate change globally. And,
Mm.
That's right.
and that's I think that's where I think the narrative struggles. And it does need a collective kind of global response that everybody's pulling in the same direction. So when we make bold initiatives, unfortunately, at a local government level, it's a harder sell because people are like, well, bother. We're not really making a difference. We are
We are.
collectively,
Yeah.
but individually, as my town or my city, it doesn't feel like it. And it actually feels sort of onerous and kind of a burden because it's going to cost more. Like, we know, for instance, climate smart building costs more upfront, right? Like building passive house or building like net zero housing costs more upfront. Actually saves you money in the long run, but it costs more upfront. And so like making that make sense. Sometimes I think we struggle with a lot of the climate science is too science. And it's like, oh yeah, no, we got these experts like giving us like calculations and physics and blah 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 and like passive house load and fenestration and blah blah blah. End of the day, it just costs more money, and people don't always love hearing from experts. But increasingly, I think the cause and effect thing is going to start to narrow and become so crystal clear that we have no choice. But unfortunately, it'll probably be a little bit too late.
So Pete, what advice? What do you want to do this, Brian? Or should I do this?
No, go ahead, please.
Okay, so Councillor Fry, Mr. Fry, Mayor Candidate Fry, what advice can you give to folks who might want to run this year in these local government elections? What is your sort of like, what does your experience tell you in terms of what people need to kind of think about when they're putting their name forward?
I mean, obviously, my experience is somewhat unique as the largest city in the province, and it's a bit of a different beast. We have a lot of attention on us, and as you know, like the local news for British Columbia tends to focus a lot on Vancouver, so we're very high profile. Um, and we have to hustle a lot of votes. Like we're a city of 800,000 people, which is again why we have political parties in the first place, because it's almost impossible to pull it off as an independent. You need the resources that a party can bring and the infrastructure and the ability to reach a city as large and dense as ours. Um, but I would say like broadly, for me, the biggest singular piece, and Brian, you've been a huge leader on the piece of mental health for local electeds. And it's about, for me, like the number one mantra is you got to have a big heart but a thick skin. Like, like the work we do, if you're here for the right reasons, you're doing it because you care about your community, you care about people, you want to make your community a better place. And so that requires that you have a big heart. But frankly, there's assholes out there that will see that big heart and they want to shiv you in it, right? They want to stick a
Yeah.
knife in it and make you hurt because they see you have a big heart. So you got to also have a thick skin, but not so thick that you're immune to the needs and the people of your community, right? So it's a real tricky balance, and it can be really hard on a lot of people. Like, I'm not gonna lie, like it's not been easy for me either. And only because like stubborn punk rock kind of ethos and the fact that in this last term, frankly, like putting me in a corner actually just sort of galvanized me and stuff, where
Yeah.
it was sort of crushing me for a little bit. I was like, oh, I'm so depressed, I can't get anything done, I'm disrespected left, right, and center. And I was like, you know what, fuck it, I'm just like, you put me in a corner, come out swinging. I'm not gonna like just roll over and curl up in a corner. And also I would say sort of galvanized by community being frustrated because a lot of the community saw what was going on and like the various sort of disrespect of institutions that happened under this administration that got suddenly I felt the wind of the community behind me. But I mean, I think
Yeah.
the other big thing in like success in local government, I feel like it's just being authentic. Like,
Hmm.
I agree.
like we are like, I mean, the thing with local government is, and this is why people are like, oh, you're just lining it up because you want to run for MP. And I'm like, I don't know, actually. MP doesn't really appeal to me in that sense. I mean, it's like, it's exciting and you get to travel all over the place and go to Ottawa, and that's all really cool and stuff, but it's not the same as local government because
So
you get
talk,
surrounded
talk,
by
yeah.
staff and you've got like constituency people doing all the work, and like I like the
Yeah.
fact that I walk down the street and I talk to people or not, and because Canadians are generally pretty polite, and I find that people are like very apologetic if they really want to talk shop with me. They ask first. That of course you'll get people who are like weirdo hecklers and stuff like that, which does sort of go with the territory. And I would say that, I mean, fully acknowledging our male privilege here is a lot different for dudes than it is for women. It could be
Yeah.
a lot shittier for women in the political realm because there's like still a deep level of misogyny and sort of like just bad behavior that
Yeah.
unfortunately women have to endure a lot more than we do. I mean, and then I would say, like also men of the off-white shade do endure a little bit of our own sort of
Yeah.
issues. But
No, we appreciate that. We're trying to get this out to as many people as we can to let them know what it is really like and humanize it, because I think we're losing that, Pete. We're losing that human focus that people like yourself do not wake up and go, how do we screw over our constituents? And we don't. We're trying to do the best for our communities in BC. And so that's where we focus a lot of our effort, is trying to do that best thing that we can do. You're in a unique position in a few other communities where there are parties and that party politics come into play. And that's why you're primed to be a great guest, because a lot of British Columbia doesn't dive into that. They see it on the newscast, but they don't dive into what that really means to you as the individual. So I appreciate your openness today. And I want to thank you for being on our podcast today and opening up and being very open in your answers and honest. And I hope people see it that way. So thanks for being here, Pete, and our paths will continue to cross, I'm
yeah,
sure.
I'm halfway tempted to make my way up to Vanderhoof for July 4th. Is
Yeah,
it
come
July
and see
4th?
Trooper. Come
Yeah,
and see Trooper, my friend.
Can I
yeah.
just
You got a couch I can stay on, right?
Oh yeah, you always open for you,
All
Pete.
right, all right.
Yeah.
let me add my thanks, P2, and just say thanks for stepping up. I mean, again, for the next level. I mean, it is very challenging, and we're living in times where people feel sometimes a permission to be not very kind to folks who they feel have power or profile. So, we know, and we know other folks running for mayor of Vancouver as well. Rebecca being one of them, and we're hoping to talk to a bunch of folks over the next little while. But we really we obviously both know you very well and know your heart. You have a wonderful heart, a big heart, and you're given the
And a thick
opportunity
skin.
and a
And
thick
thick
skin.
skin.
And you got the opportunity for, folks to have that option now in the city of Vancouver, which I think is a very, very viable and good option. So, best of luck. Keep yourself on the straight and narrow, and keep yourself take care of yourself as you're going through this. And yeah, all the best,
Yeah.
buddy.
Thanks. Great to see you guys, and thank you for all your service in your respective communities and your leadership at UBCM, which I, fully acknowledge, because maybe your listeners don't appreciate that you were both presidents of UBCM and did a lot of heavy lifting, and very much appreciate your leadership. And I learned a lot from both of you. And to all of your listeners who are possibly contemplating taking a run at local government, best of luck to you, and do it for all the right reasons, and it'll be an amazing, super rewarding experience. Like, I wouldn't have traded it for I mean, despite all the tough times, I would never have traded this for the world. Like, I've really been such a privilege to serve the people of Vancouver and British Columbia.
Thanks, Pete. Really
Thank you.
appreciate it.
Cheers, fellas.
So thanks everybody for watching another or listening, if you're listening, another episode of Day-to-Day Democracy. We're so excited to have our friend Pete Fry on from the city of Vancouver. Brian, over to you on the next guest.
Yeah, I thought today's was a great conversation, and our next guest will be Mike Bernier, former mayor, councillor of Dawson Creek, and past MLA. So it'll
And
be interesting
Minister of
to hear
Education.
from
Yeah.
him the levels of government that he sees and what's happened. So we're looking forward to that next one, and I appreciate everybody watching and listening as well. So thanks, Arjun, as always. You're a great conversationalist, and I thought today was a great look at what day-to-day democracy means in a big city.
Thanks, Brian.
Thanks, Arjun.